Welcome back to the ChrissieCast, live from the compound, where I talk to interesting people from all over the world from the comfort of my house, because homebodies rule. Joining me from her own home in Washington, D.C. today is author and memoirist Liz Scheier. To say I simply read Liz's book called Never Simple is underselling the compulsion I had to get it all in my eyes and brain as quickly as possible. She had a most unusual childhood, certainly, but the way she told the story of the life she shared alone with only her unpredictable, sometimes violent and super secret keeping mother knocked my socks off, not only because of the traumatic events, but also due to the level-headedness and tenderness in the way it was told. I loved speaking with Liz about the human yearning to belong to someone, the emotional fallout of being raised by secrets, and why the truth is always, always, always the best option, no matter how ugly you think it is. ChrissieCasters, please meet the undeniably interesting Liz Scheier. Hi there, Ladybug.
Hi, how are you?
So good. It's so good to see you, meet you, look at you.
And you.
Gosh, I don't even know where to start. I have been thinking about your amazing book, Never Simple.
Thank you.
And it's so breathtaking that your childhood happened and that it happened to you and you were able to share it. It's full of your life up until, I guess, 18. It was full of secrets. And I do want to talk about secrets and what it's like to live under the shadow of those. But what was the secret that you shared that shocked the most people that knew you?
Oh, that knew me. That is a really great question. So should I go into a little bit of what the book is about, or should we just start from assumption?
I would love you to go into, I tried to kind of condense it and I failed. So please, as the liver of this life, please.
So it published 2 years ago, so I have just gotten my elevator pitch down, so let me try delivering it here.
Great.
So the book begins on a day when I was 18 years old, home from my freshman year of college. Mm-hmm. It was fall break or something like that, and I had been planning on getting a learner's permit, because when you grow up in New York City, you don't know how to drive. There's no driver's ed. Nobody owns a car you can practice on. It's just not a thing that we do. And my mother came into the room and said, "So I heard that you were thinking about getting this learner's permit." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I don't think you're going to be able to do that." And I, of course, was offended because I was 18 and someone had told me I couldn't do something. And I said, "Oh, well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, they're going to ask you for ID. They're going to ask you for your birth certificate, and you don't have one." And I said, "Well, I'll go get a copy from the Department of Vital Records, no big deal." And she says, No, you're not listening to me. And you have to imagine all this in a very heavy Queens, New York Jewish accent, which I am not going to desecrate her memory by trying to do. And she said, you're not listening to me. You don't have a birth certificate at all. I never filed a record of your birth. And I said, "Okay, why?" And she said, "I was married when you were born, but not to your father." And out of that conversation, in that next 20 minutes, came these two bombshells that I had just not ever known, which were that, number one, she had been married for most of my life to a man I had never heard of. And number two, that the man she had told me was my dead father was a complete fiction. Fake name, fake stories, everything about him fake. And so the book is about exploring who he really was and what brought my mother to feel that creating this fiction was the best path forward for her. So I think what surprised people in my life the most was just that anything about him was findable at that point, because, I am middle-aged at this stage. I grew up very much pre-internet. And when someone passed away, he died in 1977, they're gone forever unless somebody wants to resurrect them. He's very young. He was 28. There were no newspaper articles or blogs or anything like that. He had just disappeared into the ether. And so I think people in my life really loved watching this process of finding out little bits of his life as we went.
What did it feel like to know that half of your DNA was a mystery? And I ask this because there's a TV series called Long Lost Family. I know that it's very big in the UK. I don't know if it's got a series in America. Have you heard of it? So it's essentially people in your position that know that their biological father or mother is out there and they cannot find them. And so they contact the TV show and this army of producers, track them down. And I hosted the show. So I got to see firsthand that desperate yearning for knowledge and connection and to see someone that is where you came from. Did you feel those things?
Absolutely. There was sort of a father-shaped hole, like the outline of a man. There's like in crime scene photos where the body was. There was just one of those.
The chalk outline.
Yes, exactly, the chalk outline. I tried to do like little kid math. I took myself and subtracted my mother and figured that the rest had to be like him. Like my mother was a very small woman. You can't tell right now because sitting down, but I'm enormous. I figured he must be very tall. I just tried to like pull these things out of my personality or my looks that must be like him. But you always know that you're kind of making it up, right?
Yeah.
These are just best guesses. And so going from trying to conjure him out of thin air to talking to people who had actually known him during his lifetime, even with, many decades old memories, was just completely mind-blowing.
So you first heard about this man when you were 18 from your mother, who presumably knew him as well as anybody. It was 1977 when he passed away, and as you said, there's no Google, there's nothing, no computer records at the license bureau or passports or anything. It was all paper and so easily lost. Was your mother, as kind of the first port of call, open to discussing who he was and how they met and what sort of person he was?
She tried. I mean, remember that by that time, almost 20 years had passed, and they didn't know each other very well. They'd been dating for maybe 6 months when he died. And so she was sort of resurrecting these old memories. But she did have a great rendition of their meeting story, which is that he was about 10 years younger than she was. But he picked her up in Central Park in New York City by asking for a page of her New York Times, which I think is the best New York City meeting moments that I can possibly imagine.
Yes.
And, the rest was history.
That is a Tom Hanks style meet cute. And talking about secrets, obviously that was a massive bombshell for you, but your mother was possibly the most secretive person I've ever read about on paper. Can you give an outline of I don't want to call it deception because that makes it sound malicious. Can you give us in a nutshell some of the biggest things that she invented in the hustle of her life?
Yeah, and Chrissy, I think you've really put your finger on it. She was not being malicious. I think she told herself stories that were better than the reality until she came to believe them. And so, just some of the things she created around us, she was very paranoid. So again, she never got a birth certificate, which in the US is very unusual. She made up a false social security number for me. That's the number that your taxes are attached to. It's sort of your ID number throughout life. So making up a fake one, again, unusual. I don't know a lot of people who've done that for criminal purposes. And she made up this man that she had met who was, I think she said that he had served in Korea, which he had not, that he had a large family, that they had had this long relationship. She told me that he had died, that they had gotten married while she was wearing a borrowed suit that she later returned, and that soon after their wedding, he was driving somewhere. That should have been, again, my first clue. Of course, he was not driving anywhere. And that the driver in front of him stopped at a red light. He stopped, and the driver behind him did not. And I believe the story because, of course, I did. I was a small child, and we believe what our parents tell us. But over time, it became clearer and clearer that it was just too convenient, that his family was dead or moved away, that his friends were all gone, that she'd burned all the pictures in a fit of sadness after he was gone, that he had just been wiped off the face of the earth. And that started to make less and less sense. And so I realized when I was fairly young that something was wrong with the picture, something was wrong with the story. I didn't realize quite the extent of it, but I did. But I did know she was lying, and I didn't know why. And so at the moment I was, as a child, I'm like, maybe he's a spy, maybe he's an astronaut, and he's, abandoned on the moon somewhere. I was making up stories that were much, much cooler than the actual the actual reality.
I mean, made up stories really are the spice of life. I remember when I was about 5 or 6, and it would have been the late 70s. I told a neighbour that my father had just passed away in the war, and they believed me even though there were no wars at that time. And I remember the exhilaration of making up a story that people believed. It was intoxicating. And I feel like that's what happened to your mother, because the reality was that she was a very bog standard single mum trying to make ends meet in New York City with a daughter who she obviously adored but wanted something better for her. And I feel like it's so easy to demonize mothers that are unconventional.
Yes. Yes.
And you haven't done that.
I tried not to. I mean, I think she was certainly, people othered her for a variety of reasons, some of them fair and some of them not. She was, as you say, a totally garden variety single mother, but it was unusual to be, I'm sort of using air quotes here because they weren't married, widowed that young, right? That would have been surprising where we were from. And as far as I can remember, she was one of the very few single mothers in our world. And I remember them all kind of banding together. I didn't realize at the time why they were all friends, but she reported later, and I think this probably was true, that the married women in the group were a little skeptical of them, or saw them as perhaps a little bit of a threat, or just not, you couldn't invite them over for dinner because it wasn't an even number of people at the party kind of situation.
Yeah.
So there was that. And then as she got, as her mental illness became more of her life and she lost the ability to control it, she started behaving increasingly more erratically in public. And that's when people were like, oh, this isn't just a person in an unusual situation, this is an unusual person. But part of what I tried to talk about in the book is that there is no such thing as like the capital V villain with like the twirly mustache and the Mr. Burns hands, right?
Yeah.
There are people struggling with illness. My mother was a very sick woman and she tried her absolute best. It's just that her best was not great a lot of the time.
And at doing her best left you with a lot of questions, to say the least. I want to ask you about sort of an entire childhood and formative years spent on shifting sands, and when we're forming who we are and our character and our place in the world and our opinions about the world. When you fed a lie in almost every situation, how does that affect your character as an adult?
I think it makes you very distrustful of yourself, because once you have swallowed a lie, once you have believed something that was patently untrue, it has been proven to you that you can be fooled and that it can happen again. And so for a long time, I played this game with myself where I was like, how do I really know what I think I know? And so I would look around at the people I know and be like, what if that's not really her name? What if that's not really where he lives? Like just silly things like that, because it was clear to me that I had looked my mother in the eye all those years while she told me things that were completely untrue and had swallowed them whole. So I think it does a little bit of a number on your ability to trust your own judgment.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say your own judgment, because I thought the answer might be it's difficult for me to trust other people, but it's an internal shaky element.
It's definitely internal shaky. I read those stories. This is the topic of 1,000 thrillers and movies, right? The wife who finds out that one day her perfect bucolic marriage is a lie and that her husband has 3 families or is a serial killer or whatever it is. And that's always the plot twist at the end. And I read those and I'm always like, yep, sounds completely credible.
Isn't that funny?
See how she ended up there.
And just talking about those situations where, and it happens with monotonous regularity, that men have whole other families, like another wife, another house, another set of kids at the same time. Every time I hear about those, I think, hats off to you, because that is a lot of effort. Who could be bothered? One family is enough for me.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted with the 2 kids I have.
Exhausted. And you had them so close together.
Yeah. Yeah, they're 14 months apart. That was a choice.
It was not a choice.
Well, I definitely believed the sort of horror headlines about how when you're over 35, you might as well like not even try to have a child because it will never happen. You terrible crone, basically.
Yes.
And so when my husband and I were planning on getting married, we said, well, we better start the clock on this for insurance because under the American insurance system, you have to have been trying for 6 months, even if you're lesbians, by the way, which is one of the most hilarious parts of this. You have to have been trying for 6 months
Right.
unsuccessfully
Okay.
before you get fertility treatments. And so long story short, I was 5 months pregnant at the wedding.
Mm.
And then we thought, well, this must clearly be a fluke that would never happen again. And long story short, they're 14 months apart. So don't believe the fear headlines is the end
No,
of that
I know. I often say that. I often say that because I also was fortunate enough to not have any problems conceiving. And I've got a friend who's 43 and she met somebody that she could stand. And she was like, oh, God, I might just see if it works. Like, with absolute certainty that it would not at that age. And she was pregnant after the first month and the baby's coming in July. She's like, okay, probably should have considered the outcomes of this. So look, a baby is always
Well,
good
congratulations
news.
to her.
Yes, exactly. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the process of writing because, as you've just mentioned, you had two children very close together, and anybody that has had two children even 10 years apart knows that that is a major time and energy event. I'll call it that. And yet at the time that you had these two babies, presumably in nappies, you decided that you would exorcise this story. How?
So, I don't know if you had the same experience, but I found that the things that people told me about having kids had a variety of, fell far along the spectrum of truth. But one thing that was absolutely accurate was that having kids makes you very clear with your time boundaries,
Yes.
right? Because you have so little of it that you have to get very good at apportioning it out. So it happened that as I went back from maternity leave with my second, so I now have two kids under a year and a half old and a full-time job, was the time that my mother was she was going to the second year of an eviction process that would ultimately last 3 years. The dementia had come in and mixed with the mental illness, and she had stopped paying rent and would forget that she had not paid rent. So the landlord fairly wanted to get her out, and this was causing a lot of drama. And so although I was living in a different city by that time, I was still the person getting all the calls from the lawyers or the hospitals, the police, or whoever she'd run afoul of while she was going through this process. And I just kind of needed somewhere to put all of it, all of the panic and the love and the concern and all of this. And so I realized that I had these 5 perfect hours during the week that were just mine. That was lunchtime at work. And because this was pre-pandemic when you still had, childcare.
Yeah.
And so 2 days a week I went to the gym, and 3 days a week I just started writing. And at the time it was just a therapy journal. It was just somewhere to put it. But a year into the project, very abruptly, she died. And I sort of picked my head up and looked around, and I had 50,000 words, which is half a book. And I thought, maybe this is not a totally unknown story. Maybe this is something that would be meaningful to, helpful to other people, and maybe make some other folks feel less alone in this process. And so I sort of renewed vigor, sat down those 3 days a week, typing in the staff lounge with half a sandwich hanging out of my teeth. And within about another year had finished it. And I called up an old friend who is a literary agent, and thank God he liked it because I did not have a plan B. And had he not, it would still be sitting in a drawer somewhere. So it was a good use of a lunch hour, I guess, is the punchline there.
When you saw it all written down, did you feel sad for yourself?
No, not at all, actually. I think what I came away with, and this may sound weird, is the parts of it that are funny. Because as anyone who's managed elder care of any kind can tell you, there are some very, very funny parts about caretaking, and there are funny parts about working with someone whose memory of you no longer matches reality. And it's all gallows humor, right? It's all very, very dark, but that is the only way you can, keep putting one foot in front of another while you're doing it.
Can you remember an example of these strangely funny moments?
So there was one in my mid-20s or so, and this was before the dementia set in, but when my mother was taking a lot of tranquilizers if she had to leave the house. And so she called me one day while I was, had my first like razor flip phone. I'm in the pasta aisle at the supermarket.
Yes.
And she says, it was spring, and my mother's own mother died when she was very young during the spring. So she was always very sad around April, the memory and the grief. And she said, "Oh, Elizabeth," only person in the world who calls me Elizabeth. "Oh, Elizabeth, I'm so sad. I'm missing my mother." And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mom. That's really hard." And she said, "I'm worried that she is lonely in her grave." And that sort of gave me a little pause because, in Jewish life, we don't have a lot of vision of the afterlife. Like once you're dead, you're dead. We just don't have any real sense of that.
Yeah. I love
And
that
I said,
pragmatic take, by the way. I absolutely have always loved it. You come, you go.
And I said, I think she's probably okay, Mom. I don't think her soul is there anymore. I think it's just her body. She said, "But I have a solution." I was like, "Oh no."
Oh God, here we go.
She said, "I know how we can fix that." And I was like, "I don't like the sound of that "we" at all. And she said, "So what I want you to do is have a stillborn baby so we can put it in the grave with her and she will no longer be alone."
I mean, look, it makes sense.
And, I mean, that's what's funny, is that there's a twisted logic to this.
And
right?
she's really
And the funny
thought
part
about
this,
it.
my mother never lifted like a 2-pound item if she could avoid it. Like she did not do physical stuff. So the image of her creeping under cover of night into a graveyard with a little bundle on one arm and a shovel in the other hand was just too much.
What a great solution. That would have given her a lot of peace.
Sorry to disappoint, Mom, but I could not produce one.
The odds were not in your favor on that one. I want to also talk about the fact that you started the book as personal therapy. So I'm assuming, like all of us who jot down little bits and pieces in little secret books that we keep in our top drawer, you really, when you started this journey, you had no intention of sharing it. And I want to know, was that because of the shame of it or the embarrassment of what you'd been through? Or what made you then go, "Oh, actually, I want total strangers to know my innermost tragedies"?
Right. I mean, one thing that helped write about it was that she had died, that story was over, right? Because when you're in a relationship like that with someone who is very erratic and very unpredictable, like every day can bring a new booby trap, right? You just sort of never know what's ahead of you. And so it's hard to see the whole story as it sits because it's still going on and the explosions are still going off. But once she was gone, and I realize this is going to sound very cruel, but whenever I say it to a group of people, most people look horrified and a few people laugh in relief. It is easier to have a relationship with a dead parent than a live one sometimes.
Yeah.
And in this case, I found that was true, that once the explosion stopped going off, I could see the totality of that story. I mean, it wasn't shame. I'm a person 100% lacking in shame of any kind, but I really hoped that other people who perhaps had felt isolated as I had, who didn't know how to explain what was going on in their lives, might at least see themselves reflected. And so I still, to this day, I still get regular messages saying something to that effect, and that is so gratifying.
When I finally closed your book, which I enjoyed so much, I was reminded of a theory that I have about the way that we are born. And I believe that we are born the way we are. And we sort of stay that pure way until the world kind of, fucks us around a bit. And I feel like, once it starts being mucked up, we've got to get back to the person that we were. And I immediately thought Elizabeth's mum, was really lucky that out of all the souls, she got you.
Oh, gosh, that is an extraordinarily generous interpretation of it. And I think I'm going to take that view. I mean, I think a lot of people would have done a lot better. And probably other people would have done worse. And that's the thing about elder care, is that once it's over, if you were given every decision that you made back again, you would make all of them differently and half of them would still be wrong. That's one of, I think, the hardest things to absorb about caring for an elderly parent or beloved elderly person, that there's no lawyer you can call or letter you can write or story that you craft or decision you can make that can make it turn out perfectly. And that at somewhere along the line, you have to accept that you are choosing, in some cases, the least worst option and just trying to make somebody as comfortable and happy as they can be.
And also you're giving yourself the same grace that you gave her, in that you're understanding that your decisions are not coming from a place of malice, and neither were hers. And so it's even Stevens.
Yeah. I think that is where it ended up. That likewise, I did the best I could. And sometimes my best was good and sometimes it was not so good. So what I did at the time is, in the last couple of years of my mother's life as the eviction process was going on, I won't give the whole story, but she essentially refused to believe that it was happening and would not allow any plans to be made for her care once she had to leave her apartment. And so my husband and I sat down together and worked out every possible spreadsheet and every possible solution. And I called nursing homes all over the country and tried to figure out some sort of plan. And I kept records of all of that so that afterwards, when I was in the sort of swamp of self-criticism of I should have done something differently, I should have made this turn out better, I could look back and say, we tried. We looked at all of the options we could think of, and all of them required her agreement, which she would not give. And I think if I didn't have those records, I'd still be a little bit in that swamp. But remembering the effort we put into it has helped.
I also want to acknowledge, just for people that maybe haven't read the book, that the plans and the care that you were giving was, not to disrespect your mother, but, to a woman that was not just difficult, but also violent and, manipulative and hard work. It's not, the way you talk about her, you're so understanding that it is easy to forget that this was an extraordinarily difficult situation.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And that was never clearer to me than when I had my own children, because, I have so much she didn't have. I have a partner who's doing, who does far more than his fair share of the childcare, and I have financial stability and mental health and friends and a community, and she had none of those things. And I still find it so hard so much of the time that it's really given me a lot of empathy for how well she did manage to do in her situation. She was not able to work. We lived on her Social Security checks and her disability and food stamps, and she still kept me housed and in school and fed and doing activities in one of the most expensive cities in the world, which I still don't entirely understand how that happened. I can't make the math work in my head. But, I think in many cases, women in those circumstances lose their kids to foster care or end up far more abusive than she was. She really did a lot with what she had. She was just so under-resourced as a human being in the world and as a parent that the outcome was sort of murky.
Maybe she was like a fortune teller and she knew that may be the outcome. That's why you were not registered at birth. It didn't exist in order to be taken away. Liz, I've got you to send me a photograph of yourself as a child, and I just want to talk about that because look at this little darling. And
little dimpled knees.
So cute. And you're standing on a swing. Can you tell me about little Liz and what you remember about what it was like to be in this body?
Yeah, so that picture is when I'm about probably 3 or 4 years old. I finally had hair because I was bald as an egg for the first couple years of my life. And that picture was taken at a farm in the Catskill Mountains. So if you've ever seen The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, my grandfather was a Borscht Belt comedian. And so my mother kind of went for the summers back where she understood. And so every summer we'd like up sticks and go spend a month in this town that, and I'm not joking, was called Bovina Center. And I didn't realize why that name was so funny until I was an adult. But the population was something like 50 people. I mean, it was a tiny little town. And then this working farm took in guests.
50 people, but presumably by the name, 70,000 cows?
Probably. And so she would she would hire a cab driver she had befriended to take us up the like 4 hours up into these mountains in his like yellow New York City cab and then pick us up again at the end of the summer. And it was such a bizarre thing. And like, I was a New York City kid. I had no understanding of how the outdoors worked.
Yeah.
But by the end of the summer, I was like, 4 shades darker than my usual skin because I was out in the sun all day. My feet were one big callus because I'd just been running around barefoot. It was amazing.
How wonderful.
It was fun.
And do you still do that sort of stuff? Get out and get wild?
I'm sorry to say no. That cute little girl with the fuzzy hair
Me neither.
was probably the end of my outdoorsmanship.
Now, here's a twist. I am going to hold up another photo of a young person, and it is of your biological father who you never met and don't really know that much about, only from his friends, which I believe are the only opinions that matter. I'm going to hold this up, and I just want you to talk about who you think he might have been and how it makes you feel to see his gorgeous little face.
Yeah, so that's Warren when he was, I think, about 12 years old at a desk at the collegiate school in New York. It was given to me by one of his classmates. I met them for their, it was a milestone anniversary. I think it must have been the 50th or 60th anniversary. And it was a small school. There were only 30-something of them, and 3 of them died by suicide by the time that we all met, including Warren. And seeing that picture of him, before things started to really go south for him, when he was still this like happy, cheeky little guy.
Yeah.
He's all cheeks in this picture, big smile, big dimples. My understanding from them was that he was very athletic, which is hilarious because I can't walk a straight line.
Yeah, but looking at your little legs standing on that swing in the Catskills, I was like, look at the power in them. Get him from your dad.
My brief career in competitive swinging. Yeah, but I mean, he sounded like he was a wonderful man, very outgoing, loved acting. What's the big role in football? Is it the quarterback?
Oh,
the big
God.
guy.
No, you're talking to the
Had
wrong
all of
person
these
when you're
friends.
asking about competitive sport.
It's true. He sounds like an amazing guy who just had his demons that ultimately were his downfall.
Yeah. Another quick one. Your book is obviously called Never Simple, and that's part of a quote from Oscar Wilde, "The truth is rarely pure and never simple." What were some other also-rans for the title of your book?
So the working title, like the document on my desktop, which is called Liars, because originally the form of the book was talking about like different people and the lies that they tell. And then it sort of narrowed as I wrote. But we submitted it under the title Mother of Invention, which was my agent's husband's idea.
Yeah.
Which I still think is amazing. And then 2 other books with that title published the same year. And so we had to find something else to differentiate it. I know.
Oh, what a bummer, because that is perfect.
It was perfect, but we stuck with it. And it's really grown on me.
You have said that books make the greatest gifts, and I couldn't agree more. In fact, your book that I bought has got a really nice little story, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I'm trying to find my glasses here. So I'm a reader, and I don't read as much as I should, and I don't have the time and all of that stuff. And I've got a stack of books on my night table that I call the stack of optimism, because I buy these books and I never get the time to read them. But even just looking at them gives me a little thrill. But yours, I definitely picked off the top of the stack of optimism, and I'm so glad that I did.
Thank you.
I love the internet and I love social media. That's probably an unpopular opinion, but I just think it's wonderful. You and I wouldn't be here chatting and falling in love if it wasn't for Instagram.
Exactly.
And there is a woman called Renee who lives in a regional town called Ballarat, and I've never met her. I only know her on Instagram, and she is a reader. In fact, her Insta handle is Read by Renee. And I have had a few, direct messages with her because we're like-minded readers. And when I finished the book, your book, I contacted her and I said, I have just read the most breathtaking, incredible, funny, sad, rage-inducing book, and I would love you to read it. I'm going to send you my copy. So apologies there wasn't an extra unit sold. So I sent it to her in a post pack and she read it and got back to me. Last night I said, "Oh, Renee, I'm catching up with Liz Scheier. Do you have any questions for her?" And
Oh, no.
I know. And she's like, "Oh, my God, yes, I'm sure I do. My husband's first suggestion is what's her favourite colour?" And I'm like, "Nah, you're going to have to do better than that." But here is what Renee from Ballarat wanted you to know. First of all, she said, "No question, I just want to let Liz know that she is amazing and she should be so very proud of being able to tell her story to the world. It will have helped so many people have a better understanding of the impact of borderline personality disorder, and she should be very proud of herself," which I think is lovely.
Oh, thank you, Renee. That is so kind.
She did write other questions, and I'm just going to give you one. Renee will be listening to this and losing her mind, by the way. She says, "After your mum passed away, you said in your memoir, 'Ask me again in years to come and I may feel differently,' which you have said in this interview. But in the immediate aftermath, I am finding my mother much easier to love as an icon and as a series of great and funny stories than I did as a person. It has been a few years," Renee asks, "since your mother passed away. How do you feel now when you think about her?"
Renee, that is a wonderful question. I would say largely the same, that my relationship with her now is improved, but that I miss her terribly in a way that I did not miss her in the days following her death, because I have had time to heal from the harder parts of it. And so now I just have the missing of her. So the things I think we all do when we lose a parent, where whenever I pass her favorite cookie in the supermarket aisle, I tear up a little bit.
What was
Every
her
now and then
favourite
some,
cookie? What was her
kindly
favourite?
shopper will be like, "Are you okay?" It's this almost store brand of cookies called Arroway. That's their oatmeal cookie that's frosted on top. There were many periods of her life when her entire caloric intake was Entenmann's cakes with the chocolate on top, or 6 packs of Hershey bars. She had quite a sweet tooth. But those little things that remind us of the people who are gone. And we have gotten to the stage of life where my children have started asking about her. And, these are hard things to explain. And for many years, not for many years, but when they were throughout their babyhood and toddlerhood, I was sort of bracing for how I was going to explain this to them, because they're very close to my husband's parents. And I thought the one day they're going to say, "But what about Mama's parents?" And I'm going to have to explain, like, my mother died in a homeless shelter. My father killed himself at a young age. Like, how do I put this in terms that are acceptable to people this small? And it turned out I should not have worried, because the years went by and they didn't ask and they didn't ask. And it wasn't, they were maybe 4 and 5 or 5 and 6 when it finally became clear that the reason they didn't ask was that they believed my husband and I to be brother and sister. So they thought they were already aware of all the grandparents in the mix.
That is going to be a very awkward conversation moving forward when you have to explain that that is not the case.
One of many. And so after we, sort of choked down the bile and could look at each other again and explained that, generally speaking, siblings do not marry. Now and again, now they will start asking me questions about her. And I've only so far told them the good things, and I think that's probably going to keep up for quite some time. Of course, one of these days, they're going to come up to my attic where I'm sitting now and find copies of the book and be like, "What's that?"
I know. And we will catch up then. Just on your point of siblings not being able to marry, if anyone can, you can, because you don't exist thanks to your mother and the Social Security number.
It's absolutely true.
Go for it.
Under the radar.
Thank you so much for your time, Liz. Your book, Never Simple, is wonderful, and I am excited that you also have a novel.
I have finished a novel and have started now another nonfiction project just in the last couple of weeks, so it is very delicate.
Well, we will catch up when that happens. Liz Scheier, thank you so much for your time. You are an absolute gem.
Chrissie, this is such a joy. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Aha, the ugliest truth is always better than the prettiest lie, am I right? I really hope you enjoyed meeting Liz as much as I did. It was a bit of a life highlight, to be honest. You can follow her on Instagram at Scheier, Scheier. And while you're there, follow me at the ChrissieCast for the latest on who's coming over to the compound for a natter and a brew. See you in a few days for more fresh convos, ChrissieCasters, and don't you dare bring a damn thing. You know, I always over-cater. Bye.